Hello, thank you for attending this talk on contextualization, prompt engineering, and TextGrad in conversational RAG. My name is Max Schattauer, and I've been working on this talk together with Johannes Kuhn. We are both employed at Perelyn, which is a Munich-based consulting company in the domain of data and AI. And recently, we've come across a particular problem when working on projects that involve conversational RAG, namely the problem of contextualization. And I want to start out with an example in order for you to understand what contextualization actually is. So imagine we have a RAG scenario, a conversational RAG scenario, so a conversational LLM that is hooked up with a set of tools and also a document database that should be queried by users. So a user could ask, well, what is the weather forecast for Munich tomorrow? Very valid question to ask a chatbot that is connected to the respective tools. And it might answer, the forecast predicts mild rain in the morning, but clear skies in the afternoon, which is already a satisfying answer. So maybe the user wants a visualization of that. So they ask, show it to me. And then the LLM thinks for a little bit and it shows it. Huh? What is this? What just happened here? Well, it appears that the LLM actually just considered the last message when looking through its tools and its documents to present something to the user. And what it found most suitable was a picture of it from the movie. But this is certainly not what we actually want. So what we actually want is that the query in its entirety is used for doing RAG and retrieving tools or retrieving documents or selecting tools. So what you actually want is to get this after this set of messages. And the way to get there, or one potential way, is to use contextualization. Contextualization uses an LLM to actually form or transform multiple messages from a human and an LLM into one message that you can use for RAG retrieval. So the way that this would work is, for example, that you ask an LLM, please contextualize the following conversation into one query. And it takes in the set of messages, and the output would be, show me the weather forecast for Munich tomorrow, which would be a good ground for selecting a tool or actually performing RAG. And then the output would be right. So, well, what is about this? Or what is the problem about this? Well, during our projects, we figured out that this contextualization step doesn't always work that well, because sometimes the LLM ask a follow-up question, or it doesn't really incorporate all the necessary context into this contextualized query, or is just confused by what it should do, especially if you use a cheaper LLM. Then the RAG actually doesn't really work because not the right context is not included in the query that you use for RAG. So we figured that contextualization actually needs prompt optimization. And this is where we tried the tool TextGrad. You might have heard of it. It's quite new. So what it does is automatic differentiation via text, kind of in an analogous way to PyTorch. In PyTorch, what you would do if you train a neural net, for example, is you would feed your data through multiple layers of a neural network, and then you get an output, and you try to improve the network by propagating back a loss and adjusting the weights. And what TextGrad is doing is it's kind of abstracting this into another domain, namely the LLM application domain. It's taking an input to an LLM application and feeding it forward through it, getting some final output of the LLM application. And then in order to improve the LLM application, you would figure out kind of a loss statement saying what went wrong in the different steps of your chain of your application, and then improving these hyperparameters of your setup from this loss. So an LLM would assess the output and then suggests how to improve certain hyperparameters, most importantly, the system prompt of your LLM steps in order to improve your final output. And this is also what we did in this case. So we used TextGrad to improve our contextualization system prompt, namely the system prompt that is used to transform the message history into one query that you can use for RAG. So what we try to figure out with this approach is whether we can attain better system prompts than the ones that we formulate ourselves, or, for example, the one that LangChain provides, which was our baseline. So LangChain provides a very generic but good contextualization system prompt, and we tried whether we can improve on this with TextGrad. So our setup is the following, or was the following. We started with a conversation with multiple messages, and the last human inquiry, for example, could have been what specifically needs to be revisited in these assessments according to the nature commission you mentioned at the very start. Well, if I were you, I wouldn't really know what tool to call or what document to retrieve just based on this query. So there would be a step necessary, namely contextualization. So what we do is we just use a very generic system prompt, for example, the one from LangChain, given a conversation history and the latest user question, formulate a standalone question. And the LLM just takes that as an input, and it would output a contextualized query, namely, for example, what needs to be revisited in the conservation assessments of stork species according to the Nature Commission. And this already makes more sense. It gives more contextual information for a potential document retrieval. So what you can do in order to assess this is to actually perform the retrieval. So query a database, a document database for documents. And if you have, like in our case, have a ground truth labeled data that you use, you can determine a recall@k score to assess the quality of your retrieval. And now TextGrad comes in. So you give TextGrad this contextualized query and potentially also the recall@k score and advise it to please improve the system prompt by giving suggestions how to improve it. So TextGrad would now try to improve the system prompt, and it comes up with a new system prompt. And this one, I don't want to read it out to you, it's too long, but it gives more detailed instructions of what to do. For example, it says, do not answer the question. In case it would have seen that this happened the last run, it would try to combat this by adjusting the system prompt. And also now, in the next run, the contextualized query actually got a little bit better. It included more context, and the retriever was better, which you can see at a higher recall@k score. So this actually, in this example, led to an improvement of the contextualization and hence also improved our conversational RAG scenario. So what did we find when doing this? Well, when doing 3 TextGrad optimization steps, we observed an average of 7% points increase in the recall@k score, or even 12% if you included the recall@k score into the TextGrad input. But it has to be mentioned that there's a big caveat at this in this setup, namely that the quality of the TextGrad output or the TextGrad performance also vitally depends on the input that you give to it in terms of role descriptions and variables. So, and because these also act kind of like prompts, it just shifts the prompt optimization problem into one more abstract layer, namely the optimization of TextGrad rather than the optimization of the prompt itself. But on the other hand, this setup is actually quite easy to use and automatic. So if you have a setup where you, or a scenario where you need to train certain prompts or improve certain prompts individually for certain scenarios or individual users, then it is probably quite handy for you because you do not need to do manual prompt engineering all the time. You can also outsource this task to TextGrad. And one final point that I want to make here is that this is actually not a very particular problem, but rather a very generally applicable one or occurring one, because conversational RAG is actually one of the main scenarios of using LLMs in a business case. No matter what industry you are in, if you want to use LLMs in your business, you probably end up with some LLM connected to a vector database containing business documents that you want to query. And as soon as you have users entering multiple messages, you will always end up with a contextualization problem. So I want to point out that this is something that is applicable in many different industries and many different scenarios. And I think it's important to actually have this in mind when you develop a conversational RAG scenario. So thank you for your attention and looking forward to seeing you again in the question round. Thank you.